Initiation by Robert Hugh Benson. Chapter 4, Part 1. Subsection 1. Anna sat in the hall, late on the Saturday night, waiting for the wheels that would bring her nephew home. It was a great room, this, in which she sat, running the whole depth of the house, from front to back, from the double doors that opened on the porch on the west, to the double doors that opened upon the curved stairway into the garden on the east. The lower half of the hall was panelled, some 12 feet up, and above hung the long fanning portrait, a very nearly complete set from the days of the second Charles, tilted a little forward, with a shaded electric light at the head of each. On the north side of the hall opened 3 doors: dining room, servants' staircase, and smoking room. On the south side 2 doors. The one nearer to the front led to the drawing rooms. Then came the open fireplace. Then the door of the big square morning room, and beyond it again, close to the garden entrance, rose up the great staircase that turned twice and ended in a hanging gallery that led right round the square. From this again opened out the bedrooms and first-floor passages. Tall windows above and below the gallery, 4 in each wall, lighted the hall, and in sunshine showed even the high painted roof that was on a level with the top of the first floor. It was, then, a room of very great dignity. The furniture was big and splendid. The floor, under the rugs and between, was laid with flagstones. There was some good armour of Cavalier days. Between the portraits, a little copper and silver and a glass cabinet or 2 of china lit up the dark corners. An organ stood between the fireplace and the door of the morning room, and there were high tapestried chairs about the hearth. In one of these sat Anna. She always looked singularly young in evening dress. Her hair seemed as if powdered. Her arms and throat were smooth and white, but she had not in the least the air of trying to appear younger than her years. She wore plenty of jewellery and a little fall of black lace, as if to make quite sure of this. She had dined alone an hour ago, and had suggested to Masterson to bring the tray in here so soon as the traveller arrived. Neville had wired from Folkestone that the boat was late, and that he would dine in town. It was, of course, quite dark by now, but she had told the men to leave the windows uncurtained, as it was a still night of stars. Partly she wanted to look at these, and partly she thought it would be pleasant for Neville, if he cared to look, to see the 4 windows all aglow with welcome. She had had a wood fire lighted on the hearth, and in Neville's big bedroom upstairs. She had quite a strong instinct that everything must be very alluring and pleasant for his home-coming, particularly under these circumstances. She had had plenty of time during these last 4 days to steady herself for the encounter. Mr. Morpeth had undoubtedly set her attitude. She must just take it as done. Neville was doing nothing that needed protest. He was his own master. He had every possible right to get married, and it was not in the least necessary that his aunt should give her opinion. He must settle such things for himself. There must not therefore be allowed to show even the shadow of a grievance. She must be entirely sympathetic and optimistic. She must congratulate him, really congratulate him, and be interested in it. She must show that she was really satisfied, and then, when all that had been done, she must begin to make her own arrangements, and ask his advice. But she was feeling quite sure that the Dower House would not do. It was much too near. She was very pensive, for all her resolution, as she sat quite still and listened for the wheels. She had put down her book half an hour ago, and had so sat ever since, looking tranquilly into the fire. Jim was asleep long ago, of course. She had looked in immediately after dinner into his room, which was next her own, and he had resembled an angel. Sometimes he stirred in his sleep, as she bent over him. Tonight he had not. The house, too, was as quiet as such a house ever can be. The servants were still at supper, the night was windless, and the fire one noiseless glow. She seemed to herself to be in a kind of parenthesis in more ways than one. The day of gym and small duties, and going out to the pavilion and back again, this was all over, and Neville was not yet come. Presently she knew the bell would ring from the lodge gate half a mile away as the carriage went by. Then there would break out footsteps and the sound of doors. Masterson would come through and unlock the front door. There would be the sound of skirts overhead as a maid went for a last look at the young man's bedroom fire. Then there would come the sound of trotting, then the roll of wheels, and then Neville would be here again, in this hall, its master come home, and nothing would be the same ever again. As she thought of these things, the silence suddenly impressed itself on her as a presence. She became aware with a sudden movement of her mind, not of the mere negative effect of the absence of sound, but of the positive effect of the presence of silence. The situation, viewed dramatically, as she had just viewed it, seemed to have tightened up her nerves and her intuitions. It appeared to her as if silence had just spoken, and there ran a little shiver of apprehensiveness through her. She turned her head, ashamed of herself, to look round the great dusky hall, lit only by hidden lights high up behind the cornice. It was all solemn and dignified and large, yet even the hall had a kind of significance. She did not know of what. It seemed as if it too waited, like a set scene, for an actor to speak and move. And then, with a sudden sharp thrill of real fear, she became aware of the great cornice door at the head of the stairs, kept locked now, she knew, ever since Neville's father had died behind it, in the big bed, gripping the hand of his son. She had passed that door for a few months after the tragedy of that death, with a distinct sense of discomfort every time she went upstairs or down, particularly after nightfall. But she had got over that more than 3 years ago. She had even gone in one night, alone, with her candle in her hand, and looked round the room at the great hearse-like bed. Yet here again was the same sudden thrill of terror, sharp and strong, like the blade of a sword laid against the throat. This would never do. She shifted her position in her chair, turned her head deliberately, and stared up to where the gallery began. There was the high carved banister, black against the pale wall, the great cornice over the door beyond it, and of course there was no one there, leaning over the banister with crossed arms, in a certain flowered dressing gown. It was all as empty as she knew it was. A swing door banged somewhere out of sight. Her heart leapt for an instant and then raced, for footsteps came along the passage from the servants' quarters, and the middle door opened, and then there was Masterson, exactly as she had rehearsed, and Charles behind him. "The lodge bell's just rung, said Masterson on his way to the front door. Subsection 2. The young man looked really extraordinarily well, she thought, as she sat and watched him at his little supper. He had refused to go upstairs and wash his hands. He had said that half the pleasure of coming home lay in doing exactly what he liked instantly, and what he wanted at that instant were 2 anchovy sandwiches, such as those he saw before him, and a whisky and soda. Then he wanted a cigarette, and then he desired to talk. "You must just sit up for once, Aunt Anna," he said, "and that's all about it. After all, it's our house, isn't it? And if we choose to have breakfast with sausages and coffee and marmalade at 3:15 tomorrow, who's to forbid us?" Her heart gave her a little painful prick of happiness as he said "our house." Just for the present it was true, more or less, but it would not be so for long. "Tomorrow's Sunday," she said. "Father Richardson would have a word to say if we didn't appear before 3:15. "So he would. I forgot. and I bet he'd say it too." He spoke with just the faintest touch of bitterness. He did not much like Father Richardson. It was a curious mingling of pain and pleasure that she felt as she watched him. He looked better, she thought, than when he had gone away 3 months ago. There was a line or two under his black eyes, but that was to be expected after a journey, and his hair somehow always reassured her. It looked so springy and curly and so very black. It was not in the least characteristic of an invalid. Certainly he was in high spirits at getting home. He talked very pleasant nonsense about the crossing from Boulogne, and a sporting Frenchman who had started very spry and chivalrous and had ended very limp. His face was quite green still, even on Folkestone platform, said Neville, and he had seen him shudder visibly at the sight of a cup of very strong station tea that was thrust before him by his wife. "And you've been well?" said Anna. "Good Lord, yes," said Neville. "I love the sea." "I meant generally." A shadow of annoyance came over his face, but passed again like a shadow. "Oh, yes," he said indifferently. "Please don't ask me my symptoms. I hate health." "You mean?" "No, I don't. I mean health, Aunt Anna. It ceases to be health if you think about it." "But really no more headaches?" "No, do tell me, and then I won't ask any more." "They're much better," said Neville deliberately, lighting his cigarette. "Now, really. Hello!" As he turned to throw away his match, his eyes caught a small white phantom at the end of the gallery overhead, where the southern bedrooms lay. "It's only me, Cousin Neville," said a rather doubtful voice from the gloom. "You see, I heard you talking and—" "Jim, how dare you!" cried his mother. "I told you distinctly that you weren't to come downstairs." "But I haven't, Mommy. I'm upstairs, so I thought—" "Go straight back to bed this instant." "But, Mommy—" "Go straight back to bed." Neville raised his eyebrows to her in a question, and his lips just moved in a whisper. She nodded slightly. "Do what you're told, old chap," he said, "and don't argue. I'll come and see you in bed if your mother says I may." The small pajamaed figure leaned passionately forward. "May he, Mummy? Oh, do tell me, and then I'll—" "Yes, now go." The phantom vanished. A little silence fell between the two who sat below. To Anna, the apparition of her little son came as a startling symbol of the matter that still had to be discussed between Neville and herself. If Neville had instantly spoken, it would have been all natural enough, but he did not. She stole a glance at him, and he was smoking rather violently, and his eyelids drooped ever so slightly, as they always did when he was uneasy or anxious, or just a shade out of temper. "By the way," he said rather abruptly, after that tiny pause, "have you told him?" She did not pretend not to understand. That was not her way. "No," she said. "Of course he's always known perfectly well that this wasn't his home. I mean," she corrected herself, "that it wasn't his own home. I don't suppose he's ever dreamt of anything else, but I haven't told him about your letter. I thought—" "I wonder if you'd like me to?" said Neville. She smiled. "He'd love it, particularly if you told him as a secret. He loves secrets, you know." "Have you told anybody?" She hesitated. "I've told one person," she said. "I dare say you'll think it very odd of me, but you know, you didn't say I wasn't to." "That's all right. It isn't a secret, though nothing's gone to the papers yet. Whom did you tell, by the way?" "Well, you'll think it very odd, but I told Mr. Moppet." "What? That old chap at the Dower House, isn't he? Why in the world did you—" "Neville, I like him. I like him very much. I can't think why. I simply had to tell him. I knew he'd be as discreet as the grave anyhow. And he happened to come to lunch just after I'd got your letter." "Oh, well, it's all right anyhow. Aunt Anna." Yes? Look here, do you mind? Mind? Why, I'm delighted. Haven't I said again and again? Yes, of course, all that. But I mean that it came so suddenly, and that you don't know her, and all that. She smiled delightfully. My dear boy, she's to be your wife, not mine. I'm perfectly certain that she's everything you think her, and if she isn't, why, you'll soon make her so. She's a Protestant, you know. Well, of course, if other things were equal, I'd sooner she'd been Catholic. But one can't have everything. The point is that you care for her, isn't it? Then he too smiled, and the very slight look of doubtfulness that had been on his face just now passed again. Yes, that is the point, isn't it? At least it's one half. And the other point's all right too, I think. Look here, Aunt Anna, I simply must tell you about her. It's a dreadful thing to do, I know, but I shall burst if I don't. My dear boy, what do you think I'm here for? I'll gladly stay up till 4 in the morning if you'll talk about her. Don't you see I'm dying to hear? He settled himself back in his chair. She thought she had never seen him so radiant, and at that sight the last shred of hope that the thing was not absolutely settled left even the lowest reaches of her subconsciousness. He first drew a cabinet photograph out of his breast pocket. There, he said, handing it across to her. That's number 1. She took it eagerly, tilted it a little to catch the light, and looked at it. It presented in it an evening dress, standing on silhouette. The light was exquisitely managed, and every line of her profile told. There was a silence. Well, said Neville. Her face rose to his, full of feeling. She's extraordinarily beautiful, she said quietly. Now go on. No, let me hold this. I want to look at it while you talk. She leaned back, resting the photograph on her knee, to listen. Subsection 3. I told you about her people in my letter, he began. I needn't say that all over again. Her father lost most of his money, as I said, when she was a child, and his place is Norfolk and all that. But her mother's quite well off, and there aren't any other children. However, that doesn't matter anyhow. The point is in it. He lit another cigarette from the stump of the other and tossed the stump in the fire. Well, she's exactly your sort, he began again. I don't in the least want to flatter you, Aunt Anna, but you know what I mean. She's deep, in the right way. She doesn't care a hang about society and drawing and tea parties. She loathes them as much as I do, and very nearly as much as you do. That was how we made friends at first. Then she's religious. She isn't a Catholic, as I said, though of course she may become one. But I shan't press her to in the least. She's got the real thing that's underneath all religions. She said 1 or 2 extraordinarily good things about that, by the way. When I told her what she would have to promise and all that, I told her that before I actually put my proposal into words, of course. What did she say? Asked Anna without the movement of a muscle. She said that she could not conceive that being any difficulty to anyone who understood. I didn't see quite what she meant at first. Then I saw. She meant that real religion was quite independent of those things, that Catholicism was quite as good as an external system, as anything else, if not better. In fact, I know she does think it the best of all. She said once she wished she'd been born a Catholic. He paused. Anna did not move. Well, that's the main thing, he went on. That kind of thing matters more than anything. If that's all right, everything else will be. Then she is extraordinarily fond of outdoor things, just like you, Aunt Anna. She told me how she hated the flat in town where she and her mother lived sometimes, and about the garden of their country cottage. She'll simply love this place, you know. By the way, I promised to send her all the picture postcards of it there are. Have you got a set to spare? Oh, yes, said Aunt Anna. Well, she and her mother are coming down at the end of the month, just for a few days. That'll be all right, won't it? Why, my dear boy, of course. Well then, that's all right. Where was I? Oh, yes, about out-of-door things. I told her about the pavilion here, and she said that was exactly what she had always wanted. What's the matter, Aunt Anna? Nothing, my dear, nothing. I was only changing my position. Go on. I love to hear it. I told her how much you liked it too. She wants to meet you dreadfully, you know. She said she only wished you'd stay on here, but that she was perfectly certain you wouldn't, because the really nice people always went away just when you wanted them. That was nice, wasn't it? Very nice, said Aunt Anna. I suppose you won't stay, will you? She shook her head, smiling straight at him. My dear, it's perfectly beautiful of you to want me, and of her too, and I shall remember that always, but it wouldn't do for a single second. Why not? Oh, do go on. We can talk all that out later. I want to hear about Enid. Again his face beamed all over with pleasure, and again it came upon her, as it already had 3 or 4 times since he had begun to talk, how curiously and deliciously stupid men were sometimes. They were all just large editions of Jim. The measures of their subtlety would let even camels march through. Well, he said, I really don't know what else to say. You see, I'm in love with her. You dear boy, you've said quite enough. She's just right, I know. And how clever you are to say she's like me. Where did you learn your diplomacy? No, but she really is, you know. I say, Aunt Anna, you look dog-tired. What a beast I am. A clock began to strike, solemn and sonorous strokes from a tall clock under the stairs. That's 11, he said, and you always go to bed at 10:30, and I promised to see Jim. Well, I think I will go to bed, she said. I think there's thunder about. You won't wake Jim, will you, if he's asleep? He grinned as he rose. I think I'd bet £10 Jim won't be. He's a determined child. By the way, I'll take my own time to tell him if you don't mind. She nodded. She was standing now and looking straight at her nephew, at his upright, square-shouldered figure and his bronzed face. You look a shade tired yourself, she said. Now I look at you. No headache? Just a touch, he said, but only train headache. Well, I shall tell them not to call you. She moved across to the bell. Nonsense, Aunt Anna, I tell you, and I say nonsense, too, she said. You must do as you're told, like Jim. By the way, Masterson was so anxious when you didn't write. He brought me your letter when you did, and stood over me like a gaoler till I could see there was no bad news. You mean that letter? Yes, the one I opened in the pavilion, you know. And you'll swear you didn't think it bad news? You silly boy, the best in the world. Here's Masterson. Masterson, Sir Neville mustn't be disturbed tomorrow till he rings. He'll tell Charlson if he wants breakfast in bed. Aunt Anna, you understand Masterson, don't you?
Yes,
And you'll remember too, Charlson?
Yes,
Well, good night, my dear. He bent his head to her, and she kissed him lightly on the forehead, as her custom was.